October 26th, 2015. A document lands on MTN Nigeria's desk in Lagos. At first, it looks like just another letter. But within hours, one of Africa's biggest telecom companies is thrown into crisis. Its share price tumbles. Its CEO ends up resigning. And before long, the issue grows so big that it draws the attention of both the Nigerian and South African governments. So, what could possibly cause all of that? A war? Is it a cyber attack? Or perhaps a massive network outage? Well, none of those. It all started with something most of us carry in our pockets every day: a SIM card. More especially, millions of SIM cards that were supposed to have been disconnected but weren't.
Hello people, welcome to my channel. Today we'll be talking about the biggest fine in Nigerian telecom history. But before we get to the fine, we need to go back, because the story didn't start in 2015. It starts in 2010.
Around 2010, Nigeria was facing a growing security problem. Kidnappings were becoming very common. Armed robberies were on the rise. There were bomb attacks in different parts of the country. As investigators looked into these crimes, one challenge kept coming up again and again. Many suspects were communicating with mobile phones that weren't registered to anyone. No verified name, no confirmed address, no reliable way to identify who was actually using the SIM card. That made investigations much harder. At the time, security agencies also raised concerns that criminal groups, including the likes of Boko Haram, were making use of unregistered SIM cards to coordinate and communicate attacks. The government believed that this was a serious national security risk. So, the government introduced a simple rule. Every SIM card in Nigeria had to be linked to a verified identity. If your line wasn't properly registered before the deadline, it had to be disconnected.
Recently, there have been criminal activities perpetrated with the aid of GSM phones, and the ordinary Nigerian has been the worst hit. Little wonder then that the average Nigerian sees the exercise as laudable.
It's very good because it's for a security purpose, right? Which is very good. Even in London, you don't get a SIM without being registered. So I think that's the very good option they brought in doing this registration of SIM card in order to monitor all this crime, whatever is going.
Basically, I believe it's just because of the security issues in the country, and we're trying to be like every other country in the world. Security conscious, make sure everybody, there's a data bank for people who have mobile communication devices. So it's a welcome concept here.
The process, which involves thumbprinting and submission of basic information of the SIM card holder, was described as easy by this Nigerian who just had his registration done.
The NCC, which is the Nigerian Communications Commission, issued this directive, and all mobile operators were expected to comply. Well, most of them did. Airtel, Glo, and Etisalat identified their unregistered SIM cards, disconnected them before the deadline, and submitted their compliance reports. But MTN was in a completely different position. When the deadline passed, more than 5.1 million unregistered SIM cards were still active on its network. Think about that for a second. Over 5 million lines that couldn't be fully accounted for were still connected. even after the regulator had ordered that they should be switched off.
So let's talk about what happened in August 2015. The NCC and the security agencies carried out a full compliance audit. They went through every network, they checked every operator, and the results came back.
Now, here's the part that really puts the scale of this into perspective. More than half of all the unregistered SIM cards that were still active across Nigeria's major mobile networks were on MTN's network alone. Just think about that. While other operators had already disconnected and discontinued most of their non-compliant lines, MTN still had over 5.1 million unregistered SIM cards active. And it wasn't as if the regulator caught them by surprise. According to NCC, MTN had received several reminders. There had been compliance meetings, inspections, and multiple opportunities to disconnect those lines before the deadline. But the issue remained largely unresolved. In fact, reports at the time indicates that MTN disconnected some lines in September 2015, just weeks before the enforcement action. However, the NCC concluded that those efforts still fell well short of what was required, and millions of unregistered lines still remained active.
Now imagine you are the NCC. You give an instruction, you set a deadline, and every company in Nigeria followed it, except one, the biggest one, the one with the most money. It seems like they've been playing with you for months. What do? You simply make an example.
Then came October 26, 2015. The NCC announced the penalty. The calculation was straightforward: 200,000 naira for every unregistered SIM card that remained active. With more than 5.1 million non-compliant SIM cards on MTN network, the total amount came to an astonishing 1.04 trillion naira. At the exchange rate at that time, that was roughly 5.2 billion US dollars. Now, that number is hard to grasp on its own, so let's put it into perspective. In 2015, MTN's global total annual revenue from all of its operations across Africa and the Middle East was about $14 billion. That means the Nigerian fine alone was equivalent to roughly 37% of the company's entire global revenue. One regulatory decision, one country, and a payment deadline just 3 weeks away. Imagine being in MTN's headquarters in Johannesburg that morning. This was a company operating in more than 20 countries. It had dealt with political instability, economic downturns, and intense competition across the continent. But this particular crisis was different. It had come from Nigeria, and it will become one of the biggest corporate challenges in MTN's history.
Now, the South African government has expressed its concern about the $5.2 billion fine imposed on MTN by the Nigerian communications regulator. Now, the South African minister in the presidency, Jeff Radebe, however, said that the fine would not affect relations between the continent's two biggest economies. The Nigerian Communications Commission said in October that all telcos except MTN had complied with the directive first issued in August, instructing them at the time to disconnect any unregistered subscribers or risk a fine of 200,000 naira. That translates to roughly $1,000 per SIM card. MTN at the time failed to disconnect 5.1 million subscribers between August and September. Nigeria is MTN's biggest single market, and authorities there want all mobile phone subscribers to be registered in order to make it a lot easier to crack down on any criminal activity. It has emerged that some Boko Haram insurgents have been using unregistered SIM cards as part of their operation.
The financial markets reacted almost immediately. Within 2 trading days, MTN's share price had fallen by more than 16%. Investors were alarmed, and billions of dollars in market value disappeared as uncertainty over the fine spread through the market. When a company faces a crisis of this magnitude, the pressure usually starts at the top, and that's exactly what happened at MTN. Sifiso Dabengwa, the group CEO of MTN, resigned with immediate effect. In his resignation statement, he said, "Due to the most unfortunate prevailing circumstances occurring at MTN Nigeria, I, in the interest of the company and its shareholders, have tendered my resignation with immediate effect." Just like that, the chief executive of one of Africa's largest companies was out. The changes didn't stop there. Michael Popi, the CEO of MTN Nigeria, also stepped down. In fact, the company's head of corporate affairs left as well. Within days, much of MTN Nigeria's top leadership had changed. The fallout wasn't limited to the company either. The fine attracted the attention of South African government, which formally raised concerns with Nigerian authorities. That tells you just how significant the situation had become. What started as a mere regulatory enforcement action against the telecom operator had evolved into an issue with diplomatic and international business implications. Well, for many Nigerians, it was also an unusual moment. A multinational corporation with enormous financial influence was being held to account by a local regulator over compliance failures. And businesses, governments, and investors around the world were all watching to see how this story will unfold. As dramatic as this was, the biggest twist was still ahead. Because in the months that followed, negotiations began, and they will completely change the outcome of one of the largest corporate fines in African history.
Before we continue, if you find this story interesting and if you are new on this channel, do me a favor, click that subscribe button. On this channel, we talk purely telecoms without the engineering jargon. If you also find this story fascinating, drop some comments. Let me know the part that is interesting to you so far. Now, let's get back to it.
So here is what MTN did. They did what any big corporation does when they get a bill they don't want to pay. They took it to court. MTN filed legal charges against the NCC fine. The argument was essentially, this fine is too large, the process was unfair, we deserve to negotiate. And in 2015, specifically November, while the court case was ongoing, they also wrote a letter to the NCC admitting wrongdoing, pleading for mercy. Let me read you the essence of that letter. MTN said in writing that they acknowledge their role in the 5.1 million improperly registered SIM cards, and they asked the NCC for mercy. Now, think about that for a second. They are in court fighting the fine, and at the same time, they are writing a letter admitting they were wrong. That tells you exactly how scared they were. Well, the NCC acknowledged the letter, They said the fine stands, but the payment deadline could be negotiated. That was the crack in the door MTN needed. Then something even bigger happened. MTN didn't just hire lawyers. They hired former US Attorney General Eric Holder. Eric Holder is one of the most powerful legal minds in the world. They hired him to help them navigate the negotiations. Eric Holder for a telecom fine in Nigeria. How about that for a plot twist?
But here's the moment that really shows you the scale of what was happening. With his new leadership in place, MTN completely changed his approach.
Futhuma Nleko, who had stepped in as the new executive chairman, shifted the company's focus from fighting the fine in court to negotiating a resolution. The discussions gradually moved beyond the NCC. As the case attracted international attention, it also became a diplomatic issue, with officials from South Africa and Nigeria engaging in talks alongside the ongoing negotiations. The progress was slow, but over time the numbers began to change. The original $5.2 billion penalty was first reduced to about $3.2 billion as negotiations continued. But the Nigerian government wasn't simply going to back down. Throughout the processes, authorities maintained that the SIM registration rules existed for a reason. From their perspective, allowing millions of unregistered SIM cards to remain active was a serious regulatory and national security concerns. So, while both sides continued talking, Nigeria insisted that MTN had to accept the responsibility before any final agreement could be reached. Even eventually, MTN withdrew its legal challenges against the NCC and focused entirely on reaching a negotiated settlement. In June 2016, both sides finally reached an agreement. The final settlement was 330 billion naira, which was worth about $1.67 billion at that time. MTN was also allowed to pay the amount over a 3-year period in installments. Think about how remarkable that outcome was. The penalty had been reduced substantially, but Nigeria still secured one of the largest telecom regulatory settlements ever reached on the African continent. And perhaps more importantly, the case sent a message that will shape how telecom operators approach regulatory compliance for years to come.
The money is just one part of the story, but let me tell you the part that actually impressed me the most.
The story didn't end with the settlement. MTN knew it had to rebuild trust, not just with the regulators, but with the public as well. One of the biggest steps it took was partnering with SIMFix, a Nigerian identity management company, to strengthen its SIM registration process and rebuild its subscriber database. The scale of that exercise was extraordinary. In just 10 days, MTN and SIMFix enrolled the biometric details of more than 70 million subscribers across Nigeria. Fingerprints, photographs, identity records. To put that into perspective, that's roughly the population of the United Kingdom captured in little over a week. It was one of the largest biometric enrollment exercises that were carried out by a telecom operator anywhere in the world. The impact went far beyond MTN. The crisis fundamentally changed how SIM registration was handled in Nigeria. Operators invested more heavily in identity verifications, compliance processes became much stricter and subscriber records became far more reliable than what they had been before. MTN also honored the settlement. By 2019, the company had paid 275 billion naira, with the remaining balance scheduled under the agreed payment plan. Well, looking back, it's remarkable how much changed. A dispute that began with millions of unregistered SIM cards ended up transforming the way subscriber identity was managed across Nigeria's telecoms industry. And that's probably the most lasting legacy of this entire episode.
So, why am I telling you this story in 2026? Why does a fine in 2015 still matter today?
We, the consumers, have historically had very little power against these giant corporations. When the network is bad, we complain on Twitter and nothing changes. When data prices are high, we cry and they even go higher. When our airtime disappears, and I know you know what I'm talking about, we call customer care and they put us on hold for 40 minutes. But 2015 showed us something. It showed us that Nigeria has regulators with real teeth. That a company, no matter how big, no matter how many countries they operate in, no matter how powerful the shareholders are, can be held accountable, can be fined, can be forced to change, can be made to build the infrastructure that should have been there from the beginning. The $5.2 billion fine changed the way telcos in Nigeria think about compliance. It changed the conversation about consumer protection, and it proved that at the highest level, Nigerian sovereignty is not for sale. This is why this story matters. This is why you needed to hear it.
So guys, let me know in the comment section, are you an MTN customer? Have you ever heard about this fine before? And how do you feel knowing this really happened? And that the fine helped build the database today that links you to your SIM card? Drop a comment, let me know the part of the story that interests you the most. And if you are the type that love this type of stories and you would like to understand how we even got here in the first place, from the days of Nitel to now 60 million subscribers on MTN, I made a full video on my channel detailing this story. And also, if you like telecom histories like this and nostalgias, I made a full video on the rise and fall of Etisalat Nigeria. That video has gone viral. Go watch it also. Subscribe to NAIJATELCOGUY and share this to someone who is very curious about telecoms, because we must tell this story. This is our story. This is Nigerian telecom history, and somebody must tell it properly. Thank you for watching. Stay smart, stay connected, and I'll see you next time.